Middleware is, as mentioned previously, a way of hooking in and doing something that's shared for multiple requests, or at least some subset of all your requests. It basically functions like a normal request response handler that we can do, but we have a next method we can call that allows us to execute the actual code. Middleware also allows us, you can have multiple middleware on the same request if you want to. This is how Express would allow us to actually pass a JSON input, and we'll be looking at that, and I think at module 4, how to work with that. So to use a middleware, let me just go with this one. That's what we worked with earlier. Is this still in presentation mode? It is. So if I want to hook in before any of these whole 2 requests we have, I can do app.use, and I give it a function here, and that function, it takes the request, the response, and a next variable. So I can do console.log executing middleware. I can call the next, and depending on the system, I'm not sure if we need to actually pass in the request and the response. And then I can do console.log after middleware. And down here we can do console.log executing get specific user. So if I just run this now, and then I go up here in my browser and go for a specific user. Let's go with 3. And then if I can get the actual, god damn, this is messing me up, the runs. Did I just mess up something really, really badly here? Restart. No. Over there. Back into Storm. So you can see it does them one at a time. So it executed the middleware. Let me just get this back into one single page. Then I'll just open it big again. Runs. So see, it executed this middleware, then it executed the specific one, and then it executed whatever was supposed to be after the middleware. The thing is, one thing that can happen with this is, like right now our code is synchronous. But what happens if we have async code? What happens if we, for example, have a timeout in the code and do, alright, this should execute after 50 milliseconds. So if I do this, start it, go back here and refresh. Restart the wrong one. Okay, at 2. Sending response. Start that one. So you can see right now we're executing this line of code, then we're executing this line of code, then we're executing this line of code, and then this one. But we only want this part to be executed after we have actually sent a response back, because we might want to hook into it. So how do we do that? Well, we pass in a callback here, basically. At least I would assume that's how you do it.
This is almost like promises.
Yes, except that is apparently not how to do it. Can you not hook into like that in Express? That would be really, really annoying if you can't. Well, time for Google. Express middleware. And again, our good old friend Stack Overflow. Okay, so okay. So in Express you can't actually hook in after like this. What you can do is that these can work as middlewares also. So after you've executed that, you can then call next, and then you can have another middleware down here. That is then takes the request, the response, and whatever is next. If we run that, go back here, then you can see we actually get it executed in this order. So in some systems, like in .NET, this would actually have worked because it's executing synchronously. In other systems, you can pass in a callback, like with promises. In some systems, you just work with promises, which is much easier. But it really depends on the specific system you have. There are other HTTP libraries for Node rather than Express, and they might do this differently.
When you say depending on the system that you have, what do you mean by that?
So, for example, if you're doing it in C# or Java, they'll work differently because they don't use Express; they use their own thing, and they might just allow you to just write the code as it's executed.
Also, you're talking about when you say that you're mentioning the logic behind it.
Yeah. But yeah, in Express it'll always work like this, apparently. And Express is like really old in JavaScript terms, so it came out way before promises, which is why it does not work with promises. Because newer systems, you would just get a promise back from this, and you could just do .then, and then do something here. But I doubt that'll work. We can check. And we can see what we actually get out. Yeah, so it doesn't return anything we can hook into.
Can you say again what is the purpose of middleware?
So say I want to be an asshole and make some of the requests just fail. So method random, if that is less than 0.5, then just res.send. And if I actually move it up here, no, that's actually before. That's fine. And see, sometimes it'll work, sometimes it'll fail. And middleware basically allows us to do it in a way that's done for all routes in the system. So if I just move this logic down into this specific function, it would only work for that specific function. But I might want to do it for all routes, so I might also want it to work for this users thing, and it should do that now. So if I go and say, alright, I just want all the users, and if it doesn't blow up horribly, and do nothing at all whatsoever, which is great. I love it when this happens. Should probably remove this. So right now it's the same logic that we have shared between multiple routes. So as you can see, this route now sometimes fail, and same thing with our users route. So it's a good way of making logic that's shared for many things. For example, you would put logic in there to check that the user is actually logged in before they do something. Because checking that the user logged in, that's going to be the same thing that's done across all your pages. And if they're not logged in, you're going to redirect them to the login screen. And your individual code doesn't have to bother with this. So we can just do it here. We can also, in the middleware, set additional data. So rather than just failing, I can do res.chance is equal to method random. And then down here, I can log out whatever was in user plus a chance variable that comes from, it should probably really be on the request. So rect.chance. And if I restart this, so you can see I now use the middleware to actually get additional data. For example, you might save something about the user that's logged in, their user ID, so that it's very easy to find, and so you don't have to actually go up and figure out, so how do I read the user ID? Because then when you want to change it, you only need to change it in one place. And there's a lot of middleware out in the world.
Does it work on multiple files, or you need to put the middleware?
It'll work on multiple files. It'll work on all requests that comes after when you specified the middleware. So for example, when I specified it here,
So you would
before
put that on a first loading route.
Maybe, yeah. For example, when I specify it here, it'll work on both this one and this one. But if I move it down here, it'll only work on the last one. In Express, I recall that you can do some more modularized routes where you load in routes from other modules, and then you can specify that it should only be active for this certain module, which is one way of doing it. But that's really details about Express that I must admit it's been too many years since I worked with Express last for me to remember that. Back when I worked with it a lot, yeah, I would have been able to remember this thing. But let's just look at NPM, just how much middleware that exists that we can just literally download. And this is just someone else who wrote the middleware to do this for us. So we don't have to hook in and deal with these things. We can just let someone else write that code. So A, we don't do it wrong, and B, we don't have to do it. And this is just all modules for it. And there's another 223 pages. And that is all middleware.
I read something today, I think it was from the founder of GitHub, I think. Or he does like a serve semantic, something like that. And he was talking about, dependency. Because there's like stuff, depending on how much dependency you put it on the project. You can either put too little dependency or too much dependency, where both ways will create a big problem. How much of a problem is that when you work?
Well, the thing is, if you have a lot of dependencies, and they have a lot of dependencies, and they have a lot of dependencies, then you just end up taking a crazy amount of disk space. That's one problem. But if you have each of your 10 dependencies has 10 dependencies, and each of their dependency has 10 dependencies, then you have 10,000 dependencies, I think, also 10,000 or 1,000, a lot. How do you verify that none of them has a security problem?
It's also he was talking about mostly not so much in security. I didn't read the whole thing, but he was talking about when you have new releases, because you have this version control, and the releases, you have to make sure that all dependencies the releases are compatible to all dependencies that you have.
Yeah, and that's basically testing. Because every time you have a dependency, you have to make sure that it works. And every time you update that dependency, it might break. And it might break for something specifically you do, or it might just have a new bug that you didn't have before. And you need to test again. So like having a dependency means you accept some risk, both security, but you also maybe a bit more development. But oftentimes the benefit of a dependency is you don't have to write the code yourself. And if it's doing something highly advanced, like interacting with a database correctly, it's probably easier to let someone else deal with writing that code. So you don't have to maintain it, you don't have to make sure it works, you don't have to test it. Someone else can do that. So it's a trade-off, as many things are, because doing some of these things here correctly is difficult. Other of them, not so much. For example, like this course module, that's probably 5 lines of code. But other of them, like file upload, might be 100, which is more advanced to do. So you might just have someone else do it for you, because that means you don't have to maintain it. And like, if you don't have to write the code, that means you can probably ship your program before. But if you have too many dependencies, you might wish that something breaks. There was a problem recently where someone got access to a very, very popular dependency, and then they just injected a virus in there. And everybody who depended on that got the new version, and then boom, they had a security problem. Because that was something so far down that rarely anyone really pulled it in themselves, but they might depend on something that depended on that thing. So,
But how would they get a hold of a dependency like that?
like the thing,
someone's account.
No. The guy gave them access himself. This is just random strangers on the internet. Sometimes they go like, I don't want to maintain this thing anymore, but that thing might be very popular. So someone else say, I'll take over for you and do it for you. Okay, fine. He gave access to that guy who wanted to do it. Someone else, not my problem. That's very fine. Except that guy had evil intentions. So like he came in and said, hey, I can see that you're looking for someone to maintain this. I would like to do that. All right, fine. And they just handed it over. Just literally gave him the keys to the kingdom. Thankfully, this was a very, very mild virus. It only targeted one very specific project that had something to do with bitcoins. So most people wasn't affected by it. But still, that's the downside of having these dependencies. So,
Bitcoin, I don't trust that Bitcoin stuff.
Nope, neither do I.
No.
So, one last thing before we go to the exercise. As you mentioned, I can set things on the request, but I could also just like read out things from the request. So I could console.log the query parameters if I wanted to, and then use them for something in the middleware. So here there is no query parameters, but if I actually pass in something, and it's the other one, damn it. Come on, mouse, work. So there's that, and then we can do count equal to. Because it's request and restart and then reload. As you can see, we get access to the query parameters. So if we want to use them, we can do that. We can use the query parameters in here, we could update them, we could literally just reply to the send, as you saw how I did that about every other time return an error thing. We just replied to it without actually letting it go through to the actual route that handled it. So that's the basic idea of middleware, and the use is, I would say it's actually very rare that you write one yourself. Usually you might need a couple to handle something, but you just pull those in from the internet. Same thing with making sure that login works correctly. Let someone else write that code. You just pull it in and use it. So it's actually very rare that you end up writing one yourself. So this time around there's a tiny bit of exercise. So for this, you should implement a middleware function that adds key to the request object that indicates if the user is using a Chrome browser. Hint, you can read the user agent header to figure out who's sending a request to you. So tip, log out the user agent, see what's in there, see if you can figure out how we can guess that it's Chrome.